didn't want to really see me dance to that, did you? Yeah? You'd walk out. It's bad enough if I sang out of tune, would you stand up and walk out on me? You probably would, there's no question about it. But Wally said he's got all this data, so he hired an economist, to make sense of it. Well, I'm going to disappoint you, because I'm an economist that's not really very good with numbers. So don't expect a whole lot of charts and tables. Now, I know everybody in this room loves charts and tables. Don't you look forward to walking into a meeting where it's nothing but charts and tables, right? Yeah, it's the only way to go. I'm not good at that. So you're going to have to suffer with me actually telling a story about the economy, okay? So, my job is to set the stage on where the economy's going. Because ultimately, as you all know, in business and especially the restaurant industry, it's the economy, stupid. I mean, let's face it. When James Carville said that to Bill Clinton, he was right on both accounts. It was the economy, and Bill could do awfully stupid things. There was no question about it. But we have to recognize that there are economic trends, and economic trends don't necessarily stay the same. What do I mean by that? Well, the first quarter of this year, we got the economic numbers. And where is the economy right now? What's going on right now? Well, if you believe the data from the first quarter of this year, the economy actually contracted. It declined by nearly 1 full percentage point. Now, that's a number I think we all can understand. If it's negative, it ain't good, right? Meanwhile, I'm going to tell you that the economy is actually in good shape. So how can we have a declining economy and an economist who's not very good with numbers, apparently, tell you that the economy is actually in good shape? The answer is that conditions change. And changing conditions is the critical factor in understanding where your business has been and where it's going to go. And the economy constantly does change. Let's face it, if the economy grew at a constant pace, month after month, quarter after quarter, I'd be looking for another job. And since I really like what I'm doing, this ups and downs in economic trends, is really great, at least for me. It's not great for those of you who have to manage with that, but for an economist, it's the best thing. Why? Because we have to figure out why we had one trend and what the next trend may be. And that's something that I think you really need to recognize is important in your own life. It's a lesson I taught my son. Now, this was about 10 years ago when Adam was a teenager. He was 16 years old. And we were playing golf on a course that I'd played my entire life. And the 8th hole on this golf course is one of these relatively short par 4s. It's about 310, 320 yards, depending on where they put the tee box. And it's elevated at the same time. And one day we're out there, and it's a beautiful day, and the wind is blowing, and we get up on the tee, and the wind's coming from behind us. And Adam looks at me, and I know what that means. He gets that smile, and he goes, "Dad, I'm going for it." And that usually means, give him my great, big, huge Bertha. You know, that driver that's about that big, okay? I need one that big because I can barely see the ball, and if I need to hit it, I need something that big. So Adam gets up there, and he goes after that ball. I mean, he comes out of his shoes. He comes out of his socks. He's losing his toenails. He smashes that ball straight down the middle of the fairway until it starts to bend. And it bends a little bit more, and it bends a lot more. The kid hit the biggest banana I'd seen in my life, okay? Slices it all the way off to the right-hand side. So we pop into the cart, go down there, and he's about 3-4 feet from this 15, 20-foot pine tree. So he looks at me and he goes, "Dad, what do I do?" I said, "Well, Adam, when I was your age and hit the ball in this spot, I'd get out my 5-iron and I'd put the ball on the green. So being my son, he wants to one-up me. He gets out his 6-iron and he crushes the ball right into the tree. He looks at me, Dad, what happened? I look at him and I go, Adam, you got to remember, when I was your age, that tree was 3 feet tall. If you don't adapt to changing conditions, you really can't succeed. And recognizing that those conditions have changed is really critical in taking a look at where the restaurant industry is going to go for the rest of this year. Why did we have a negative quarter in the first part of this year? Well, there are several basic reasons for that. The first and probably the biggest reason is that the trade deficit widened. Well, that's not really good, because if we're importing a lot of goods, all our money's leaving the country, and if we're not selling a lot to the rest of the world, we're not getting a lot of money back. This is bad. Well, there's only one problem. We had a thing called the West Coast port strike. Anybody familiar with that? Basically, it shut down the ports on the West Coast. We had freighters lined up halfway to Asia, waiting to get in. The problem with imports is that if you don't actually offload those goods, it's not an import. Once they settled the strikes, imports soared. We had a wide trade deficit. Guess what? That's done. When we just saw the April trade data, it's turned around. So one of those factors was temporary. Similarly, oil prices collapsed. If you're in Texas, you probably know that quite clearly. Cutbacks in rigs, all sorts of things reacting to this very low decline in prices. Well, what happened? Prices have gone up by 20% already. That stopped, and so we had a turnaround as far as that's concerned. So we had a couple of factors that were at work here that have already turned around. Indeed, what we're probably going to get is the same thing that happened last year. Last year, we had a sharp decline in growth in the first quarter. We had a lousy winter last year. We had a lousy winter this year. We slowed consumption. The weather's nice. People are doing things once again. The economy has turned around. And that's critical. You don't look at the number. You look at what's behind the number. What was behind the number was a port strike that was settled, oil prices that went down have come back up, and a winter that thankfully is over. It's even dry here in Dallas, okay? In the Northeast, my in-laws who live in Massachusetts actually got to see their front lawn after 8 feet of snow. Right? So everything's turned around. The economy has come back. What that means is that the trends that were existing at the end of last year are picking back up. The important part for the restaurant industry is that it has to do with job growth. We had some weak job growth in the beginning of this year. The April number was better. Tomorrow we get the May number. I would be surprised if the May job growth was not even better than the April one. The unemployment rate is coming down. Why is that important? For two critical reasons. One, it has to do with income. We have had some pretty weak income growth over the last 7 years. More job growth, lower unemployment rates. We're now getting into a clear period of labor shortages. Now, the data, they're nice, they're fun. Sometimes it says that, on one set of data, things are not changing. Other sets of data, it says it is changing. But wage changes are beginning to accelerate. When you start looking at the numbers that have to do with total compensation, they're beginning to rise. Indeed, in the first quarter, they rose as rapidly as they did on average during the 2000s or the aughts or whatever you call that period of time, okay? We're now beginning to see that change. The problem is that compensation, worker pay, is lumpy. Like the mashed potatoes my mother used to make them. I never liked it. Just like we don't like the fact that we get our pay increases only periodically, if we get our pay increases at all, right? It doesn't come constantly. You don't wake up and say, okay, I got a pay increase last month, I'll get it next month. If you get it once a year, that's really nice. If you get it once in a while, that's also nice. But it doesn't show up all the time. what we're beginning to see is that a lot of, especially at the low income levels, the minimum wage levels, businesses have already made the decision to raise them. You can look at Walmart or Target, a lot of the large companies, but even a lot of the companies we don't hear about. The recognition is that those wages are going up. In addition, as the unemployment rate comes down, and it's about 5.4%, economists like debating all sorts of things, such as, people talk about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, and they think that that's, kind of a trivial discussion. Economists debate the kind of dance they're doing. Those are the kinds of, real detailed discussions we get into. Well, whether the level of full employment is 5% or 5.25% or 5.5%, we're pretty much there. If you take a look at job openings, they're beginning to soar. We're at record highs for job openings. And where is the greatest? It's in two places: professional and technical services and hotels and restaurants. Those are the two areas that have the greatest percentage of job openings. They have the greatest percentage of turnovers as well. The shortage of labor is beginning to cut home, and that's going to only accelerate as this economy begins to pick up steam. So when I look out into the future, I see that those wage gains are rising. As wages increase, it's not just the lower level. Take the example that happened with Walmart just this week. They initially announced they were going to raise the minimum wage. This week they announced they're going to raise the wages for the middle level employees. It spreads through the whole economy. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process, and the government data always takes a longer period of time to find it, but it's already occurring. And that's critical because we're in an industry that's, while it's relatively mature, you can still have really strong growth even in a mature industry. What's happened is that during the recession and the recovery, instead of the normal increase in incomes that would generate a normal increase in sales in the restaurant industry, we've had largely a flat increase or no increase as far as compensation is concerned. So even the normal upturn that occurs as the economy begins to pick up steam hasn't occurred because of this lack of wages. As we go through this year and wages start to accelerate, because remember, we've held back the dam. Businesses have held back the dam because they haven't wanted to raise wages, because they haven't had to raise wages for the last 6, 7 years. They don't even have it in their business plans. How can I raise wages if my business plan says I'm not going to raise wages? You can't. But with the labor shortages becoming extreme, that dam will break. And as it breaks, income will rise, and we will start seeing sales. We will start seeing both larger tickets, more customers. The traffic will increase, and that process is going to occur. It'll also do a second thing. One of the things that's been happening recently, and why we might have some of the weaker numbers as far as sales are concerned, has to do with confidence. Income is critical. You put up a chart with income versus restaurant sales, and bingo, they go together. But what also affects people is confidence. And the winter really knocked the heck out of confidence. It was pretty bad in a lot of parts of the world. I mean, I live in Philadelphia, and the grumpiness of everybody by the time we got to the end of March was unbelievable. Nobody wanted to do anything. Confidence fell. Uncertainty occurred. Rising energy prices didn't help either. But as the economy picks up steam, that too changes. So when you look at it, the income is changing, the confidence will change. We're in a cycle in the economy that we hadn't gotten the upturn in the recovery, and that we're slated to get that as we move forward. And finally, there's the issue of millennials. I like to make the point that there was a study done, and I've asked my son this specific question as well, Do you consider eating out a luxury or a necessity? For me, it was a luxury. For millennials, it's a necessity. And keep this point in mind. Over the next 10 years, millennials will become 75% of the workforce. So as long as they keep that view that eating out is a necessity, as long as they grow into the largest portion of the workforce, the outlook over the next year and 10 years is really good as far as the restaurant industry is concerned. Thank you.